The top business stories live from the Sky News City studio. The chief executive of Aviva, one of the UK's leading pension providers, tells this programme the general election result needs to be decisive. National Grid announces £60 billion worth of investment in energy network infrastructure in the UK and United States. And the best-selling fantasy author Sarah J. Maas has helped Bloomsbury Publishing to its best ever results. Good afternoon, this is Business Live with me, Ian King. The chief executive of the UK's biggest life insurer has called for a decisive general election result, saying businesses like hers need certainty. Dame Amanda Blanc was speaking to me as Aviva reported a 16% rise in general insurance premiums and a 15% rise in net flows to its wealth and pensions business during the first 3 months of the year. I began asking Dame Amanda when she thought inflation in general insurance will begin to ease.
Well, I think we're coming to the tail end of that now. I mean, last year was a bit of a crescendo on price increases. The combination of increased thefts, supply chain costs, labour costs, all coming through and spiking towards the end of the year. I think that flattens off now for new business, but for renewal business, obviously, we'll still see that through to maybe this sort of second half of the year.
Do you expect more attrition in terms of the number of providers in the sector?
I think that's difficult to say. I mean, we have seen consolidation, for sure, and it really is an area where you need pricing sophistication, you need investment, whether that's in the brand or in your underwriters or your pricing teams. So, you know, we'll see, but it is an active market, and I don't think that's going to change.
Health and protection up 5% during the quarter. Yeah. Have you been surprised at the extent of demand for private health cover?
Well, I think not surprised. It's been phenomenal, really, in terms of the amount of growth opportunity. What we've had to balance is the sort of operational constraints that brings with it, because, you know, you have to ramp up your teams accordingly. But I think if you look at NHS waiting lists, if you look at GP, a lot of people are taking health insurance for the GP service, and they're using that frequently, and then obviously they get a quicker referral to a consultant.
Health insurance used to be seen as something of a luxury product. It feels more of an essential these days.
I think that if what you're seeing is if individuals can afford to buy it, they are definitely doing that. They just want to remove any uncertainty that, you know, if they need a new hip or a new knee or a quick appointment with a consultant, they can get it. But what you're also seeing is SMEs and corporates thinking about how do they protect the wider workforce or key persons within that workforce. So we're basically seeing growth across all three segments, which is obviously positive for us.
Now, net wealth flows were up 15%. Obviously, a lot of that is workplace, but clearly there's a massive appetite among individual investors to deploy cash in the markets right now. What do you put that down to?
Well, I mean, as you said, workplace is a very, very significant part of that. You've seen, you know, higher salaries and also high employment rates, so that's benefiting workflows. And we are definitely the number one player in that market. But I think on the platform, what you're seeing is individuals looking now, you know, if they're seeing that interest rates might come off, that actually they will invest in the platform, in the funds on the platform. And so we're definitely seeing an improved appetite for that. But we see so much opportunity in wealth. You know, the wealth market will be 2.3 trillion by 2030. And so it's really growing, and we are definitely benefiting from that.
Now, this is the first chance we've had to chat since you announced your big acquisition going into the Lloyd's market again. Remind me what the reasons behind that are. So
the Lloyd's market gives us distribution that we wouldn't necessarily have access to. So there are many brokers that place business only via Lloyd's or certain business via Lloyd's for the licensing and for the distribution stretch. And we didn't have that capability. So this opens up a significant proportion of the market to us. It's very exciting. It's in that global corporate specialty line, which is profitable. So it gives us the opportunity to continue to deliver profitable growth.
Now, we've just had a general election called. You've spoken at Labour's business conference. You're on Rachel Reeves's business task force. Presumably, you like what you're hearing from her.
Well, I think that I've also been on the Prime Minister's Business Council. So I think, obviously, we're apolitical. What we want is for the environment to be one where we can invest with certainty. You know, we want consistency and stability, and so that whoever is the winner of the election, we want the election to be decisive, and we really want there to be certainty for us to be able to invest in things like UK infrastructure. We've invested £9.5 billion in UK infrastructure in the last 3 years. Our commitment is 25 billion over the next 10 years. In order to do that, you have to have a more certain environment, and so that's what we look forward to.
Scope for raising taxes is going to be very, very difficult, whoever wins the election. Would you be worried about an incoming Labour government, for example, imposing a wealth tax? I mean, after all, they raided the pension sector the last time they were in power.
Well, I think what you have to be careful of with all of these policies is you have to look at, you know, what is right for the longer term. And what we do not want is a policy which then changes, you know, 1-2 years in. What we're thinking about is we have 5 million pensioners in the UK that we look after. And what you want is certainty about their investments and about how they can plan for their retirement. We know it's a major problem in the UK that many individuals do not feel that they have enough expertise to be able to plan for that retirement. If you've got things constantly changing, then it's very, very difficult for individuals to do that. So I think, you know, once you know what you're dealing with, I think you can pretty much deal with most things. So it's just that certainty that we need.
Some other business news stories for you now, and UK economic activity continued to grow this month, but at a slower pace, according to a closely followed business survey published today. The Flash Purchasing Managers Index survey, in which anything above 50 represents growth and anything below that a contraction, came in at 52.8 in May. That was down from 54.1 in April at a 2-month low. It reflected a slow growth in the services sector, although manufacturing activity was at a 22-month high and returned to growth. Shares of Hargreaves Lansdown surged by 16% at one point today, following news it has been approached about a possible takeover, valuing it at £4.67 billion. The owner of the UK's biggest investment platform has rejected the approach, which comes from a consortium led by the private equity firm CVC and the Abu Dhabi Investment Authority. It said the approach fundamentally and substantially undervalues Hargreaves Lansdown and its future prospects. The Chief Executive of National Grid has told this programme he's confident whoever wins the election will support the company's plans to invest heavily in the transition to renewables. National Grid said today it's raising £7 billion from shareholders to help fund a £60 billion investment in energy network infrastructure in the UK and United States during the next 5 years. The investment comes at a time when power networks everywhere come under strain due to rapid growth in electricity demand as economies decarbonise. National Grid also reported a 15% fall in pre-tax profits to £3 billion for the year to the end of March. I've been speaking to John Pettigrew, the Chief Executive.
It's unprecedented, I think, in terms of its scale. Over the next 5 years, National Grid's going to invest £60 billion, more than half of that in the UK. That's double what we've invested in the last 5 years here in the UK, and it will support about 55,000 incremental jobs, but it will also enable us to continue the journey of the energy transition, connecting more renewables and also reducing our dependency on gas and ultimately reducing bills for customers. And with that, Ian, you would have seen that we've also announced a comprehensive financing package, including a £7 billion rights issue. So it's a big moment for National Grid and a big moment, I think, for the energy transition, both here in the UK and in the US.
As you say, this is double the sum that you invested during the previous 5 years. Does that carry any kind of recognition that really grid connectivity is now becoming pretty critical and that you perhaps haven't done as much in the past as you should have?
No, I don't think so. I mean, actually today we're also announcing our results, and our reliability here in the UK is, we're reporting 99.69, so it's world-class reliability. And actually the investment that we've done over the last few years in the grid has allowed about 10 gigawatts of renewables to connect. And people would have given the stats about last year, we had more electricity produced from zero carbon sources than from any other source. So we've been in a good place, but actually you can describe it as we're at the foothills of the journey of the full energy transition. And what we're doing today is setting out, you know, how do we accelerate that with the £60 billion of capex that will take us to the next level.
Now, obviously, a business like yours depends on stable and consistent policy. We've just had a general election called. Does that present any threat to you in any way, do you think?
No, I mean, as you can imagine, given the role that National Grid plays in the UK, I spend a huge amount of time with the government, but I also spend time with all the opposition parties. And actually, there isn't a huge degree of difference between them in terms of they both recognise the need for the investment in the infrastructure to enable the energy transition, to allow us to connect the renewable generation, which ultimately will reduce our dependency on gas. So I'm not expecting, if we do see a change of government in the UK, there to be any impact on the 60 billion that we've announced today.
You mentioned the thousands of jobs that are going to be supported by this investment, 55,000. Is the skills base there in the US and the UK to support this investment? Are you going to have to step up your own training?
That's a great question. I mean, we've already done a huge amount of work with the supply chain to make sure that we can lock in the skills that we need. Here in the UK, National Grid just announced a £9 billion, what we call an enterprise framework agreement, which is with seven of our supply chain partners who will provide us with the skills and capabilities to do the construction work. But having said that, there is a lot to be done. National Grid itself will be ramping up massively the number of graduates and apprentices that we take on. And we're also changing the way that we train people so that we can halve the time it takes to get to a fully qualified engineer that can do things like build overhead lines and substations. But similarly, we're working with the supply chain as well to make sure that actually we can share resources in a more effective way going forward. So there's a lot to do on the skills side. You're absolutely right.
The best-selling fantasy author Sarah J. Maas has helped Bloomsbury Publishing to its best results in its history. Bloomsbury, famous for publishing J.K. Rowling's Harry Potter novels, reported an underlying pre-tax profit of £49 million for the year to the end of February, which was up 57% on the previous 12 months. That was helped by a month's sales from the latest Sarah J. Maas novel, House of Flame and Shadow, which became a global #1 bestseller when it was published on the 30th of January. I've been speaking with the founder and chief executive, Nigel Newton.
The great news for Bloomsbury and its shareholders is the way that juggernaut has continued since the end of the financial year on February 29th that we're reporting on. And both the company as a whole and Sarah J. Maas in particular have had a terrific first quarter into the new year, which is why we've increased the guidance for the current financial year. The market for Sarah Maas is extraordinary. She was described recently in Graydon Carter's Air Miles as the Taylor Swift of publishing.
For those who aren't familiar with her work, what do you think makes her so exceptional?
She has an extraordinary gift to imagine a whole new universe in which people find escape and fantasy and romance and all the rest. In fact, of the 15, or is it 16 with a new book that she's published, they're across 3 different series, 3 different imagined universes. And the extraordinary thing is the way the demographic has increased. It began as a sort of a young adult phenomenon, and with the new series, there are readers of all ages who become absolutely addicted to these books when they start to read them.
And worth noting that Harry Potter still continues to do incredibly well for you.
It certainly does. The magic of Hogwarts is exerting the same appeal that it has for 2.5 decades now. The editorial team at Bloomsbury, working in conjunction with J.K. Rowling and her agents, have created some marvelous new books, the Harry Potter Wizarding Almanac, which we brought out last year.
Revenues on the non-consumer side were slightly lower. What was happening there?
Well, I think the long-term picture in non-consumer is all growth. Yes, there was a small blip of 4% as US government's COVID funding schemes that were benefiting universities were withdrawn. But if you look at the demographic, where World Bank figures show that higher education student numbers worldwide are expected to grow from 220 million in 2021 to 380 million by 2030. So there's no question that academic publishing is the place to be. and we're there.
So the statement today, you list a number of publications due for later in the year. Which are the ones that excite you the most?
Well, we have so many incredibly exciting books. I think the one I'd single out is The Golden Road by William Dalrymple, which is a magisterial account of events that are partially familiar, but only a little bit. And it's about the extraordinary export of India's culture, and in particular, India's religion in around the year 600 and beyond to China. I think it's completely fascinating.
Well, equity markets in Europe have had a pretty mixed session today. Here's how they finished up in mainland Europe. Actually, only the IBEX in Madrid in negative territory at the end of the day. Here in London, the FTSE 100 slightly off the last I checked. Let's have a look at it. Yeah, it's finished off a third of 1%. The biggest faller, unsurprisingly, National Grid, that huge cash call, which is Europe's biggest outside the banking sector for 15 years, while the distributor RS Group is off 7% on broker comment following its results yesterday. To the upside, St James's Place is up 4.5%, and that's after the takeover interest in its rival Hargreaves Lansdown. Meanwhile, the aircraft engine maker Rolls-Royce has finished up nearly 3% following an upbeat AGM statement. Outside the FTSE 100, Wizz Air has risen by 10.5%. That's after it reported its first annual profit in 3 years, while the defence contractor Kinetic has risen by 13.5% to a record high after it raised its full-year sales and profits forecast. Meanwhile, the investment platform AJ Bell is 12% to the good after its results beat expectations. Over on Wall Street, the S&P 500 and Nasdaq have opened at record highs after the chip maker Nvidia reported blockbuster results. It's currently ahead by some 9% to take it to a valuation of $2.3 trillion. Live Nation, though, the parent of Ticketmaster, is down 5% on reports the US Department of Justice is seeking a breakup of the company. Here's the currencies. Not much going on among the major pairs. Meanwhile, the oil price earlier fell to its lowest price for a week. It's since rallied somewhat. About a Brent crude will currently set you back $81.67 a barrel. That's off 0.25%. Just before I go, if you have a look at this QR code now, you will be able to see a piece that I've written about what businesses want to hear from parties during the general election campaign. Do have a scan of that QR code if you want to read that now. That's it from me. No morning programme tomorrow due to the Post Office inquiry. Back at 4:30 tomorrow afternoon. Hope to see you then. Stay tuned. Mark Austin's up next. Cheerio.